Morning, Tegan. Morning, Dr. Newfield. How are you?
Nice if I didn't mute myself.
You know how often I do that? I join the club.
I mean, I thought I would press the mute button and it would not be, weird, asking me like 9 questions. But I'm gonna be dead honest with you. They dove right back in, like immediately as soon as they got back in.
Really?
So we've kind of set up a routine where they'll spend 1 or 2 days going through the materials.
Yep.
And then they'll spend about 2 days using one of the videos I would do on each of the practice sessions, just to walk them through the practice, but not give them directly the answer. Just say, hey, reference back to the practice sheet. The naming conventions they're using is based upon the software. And here, let me give you examples of how when you have templates for other Excel worksheets, that you have to build it exactly the way the software is asking you to build it for their automation purposes. Doesn't matter if it's a Kahoot or a GimKit, or if it's, or in the case of me doing like membership for different organizations.
Right.
Each grouping, while one template comes over from like a piece of software that says different nationalities or races, one may say it's only Hispanic, while the other one says I need it to be Latino/Hispanic. And so you need to find that macro to make sure it matches it up appropriately.
So are we, having heard you say that, are we going too slow, or should we be driving faster and get them into more advanced stuff?
No, not yet. Not yet. They're just now they're just finishing up variables right now.
Okay.
Because of all the hurricane stuff.
Right.
So we may start ramping up a little bit, but then I look at the calendar and it's like we only really have 5 weeks to Thanksgiving, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I think, to Thanksgiving, and then like 3 after that.
Okay.
So we'll be fine, because I'm starting to dig into that last unit before the exam.
Right.
Like I'm 2 weeks ahead, just because I want to make sure that I've got it. What's the why? You know what I mean?
Right. That works.
So when
if you get a beat on the class and feel like we need to go a little bit faster, just let me know and we'll be happy to do that.
Sure. But no, I think so far we're because of all the hurricane stuff, the pacing is completely fine for right now. But I'll definitely let you know if things ramp up. They should all be starting control flow by Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay.
Unless one's ahead of me, which I think a couple of them might be, but I'll know more when we check in today.
Okay. There's not going to be many of us on today. I'm waiting for Jeffrey to join.
Sure.
Because the UiPath is a big event this week.
No worries. And actually, I also have like a leader in each one of the classes, because they're spread out between 3 different periods.
Mm-hmm.
So while they meet with us,
a student leader. That's nice.
I got one who's like really hardcore about it. He's making sure everybody's staying. Like he'll do the whole hands-on with them and everything.
You know, in our first class we ever did, I originally partnered with the UiPath CEO. We did our first high school program. I guess it was about 3 or 4 years ago, here locally in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex where I live. And I had a student leader that just emerged, right? That just kind of started leading on his own. He ended up being our assistant. He interns for me now, as a matter of fact.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I told him it could lead into something. You just keep going at it, and we'll see. But no, he's what was it? He can't be here for the morning calls.
Okay.
Just the way his schedule works. He's one of our dual enrollment students, where they've got a virtual period in the morning.
Right.
They come in a little later.
Let me see if Jeffrey's joining. If not, we can do it without him. Is everybody there?
Everybody's here, and they're sitting around my daughter's computer right now.
Okay.
And then I've got a couple more who will come in later today.
All right. Let me give him a minute. I just pinged him. Let me see if he's joined. There he is. Jeffrey's there. Hey, Jeffrey.
Here we go. All right. I gotta love technology. I've been like firewall unblocking everything that Bevy uses because I've only used Zoom. So I had like a bombardment of URLs to unblock.
Okay. We were just talking, Jeffrey. Dr. Newfield has kind of gone forward and gone into some of the other modules and done some videos, and the kids are all caught up to where we're at today on control flow.
Including control flow?
Yeah, but if they start getting too advanced, Dr. Newfield will reach out to us. We may want to step up our pace a little bit, maybe get them into RE framework or some of the beginning parts of the advanced curriculum before they go for holidays.
And I do want to mention, I'm not sure what happened to the video. The reason why I went into the video aspect of it, when we had the morning of the fire alarm situation, we only had 10 minutes of that video recorded.
All right, let me find out from Diana where that's at.
So yeah, I had to kind of. That's when it was like, okay, you know what? I need to start seeing this myself, and let me start digging around.
Yeah, she may have just posted the wrong one, Dr. Newfield.
It's okay.
I'll find out.
I need to know anyway. So.
Right. No, I get it. I'll let her know. If you're ready, then we're ready to go. Let me share my screen.
Sure, and I'll mute my side.
All right then. Can you see my screen, Jeffrey?
Yes.
Hold on. Maybe not now because I need to get into a different mode here. Bear with me one moment.
Okay. Yeah.
It looks like presenter mode's not going to work for me this morning, so we'll just do it this way. Make sure I'm sharing the right one. Tell me when you can see it, Jeffrey.
Yep, it's on.
We good? Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Welcome. I'm Chris and Jeffrey. We have a small crew today because UiPath is having an event, and me and Jeffrey did not attend, only so we could be here with you. Right, Jeffrey?
That is correct.
That's correct. Today we're going to talk about control flow, but before we do that, I know that Dr. Newfield was filling me in on some of the things you've been doing after the disruption of your lives from 2 different hurricanes. And so I want to find out if anybody has any questions before we jump into control flow. We may be able to finish control flow today, which may free up a little bit of our schedule a little bit. So we were talking about getting you into some more advanced stuff as we go along. So if anybody has any questions that Jeffrey and I can answer as far as concerns variables and arguments, please let us know now. Forever hold your peace, because I'm fixing to jump into a control flow. Anyone? I'll give you about 10 seconds to raise your hand or knock Dr. Newfield upside the head so you can get his attention.
Now we're good.
All right, then. Let's go into control flow. And we're going to go through the boring slide stuff first. Trust me, I'm not a slide presentation guy. I like to teach and stand in front, use my hands and demonstrate. So Jeffrey's come up with some demos that we're going to key to. Jeffrey, you just let me know when you have one of those demos ready, and I'll pause and let Jeffrey walk through the demos on control flow. And we're going to kind of set it up on a scenario that all of you may be familiar with, but let's talk about the ways we control flow and why we control flow. The inherent nature of RPA, robotic process automation, is to replace human interaction in a system, whether it be a mundane process or several integrated mundane processes that can work together behind the scenes so we can free people up to do more ideation, more strategic thinking, and benefit the organization and cut the costs for the organization. So in that process, and I'm sure Jeffrey will attest to the fact, one of the things you'll realize as we get further into our our program at Suncoast is your bot's going to go faster than your system in many instances. And we slow the bot down because systems often can't keep up with the speed of your automation. So in using control flow and the type of sequences and workflows, we try to give the bot not only decision points, but points to pause so your system can catch up, especially if we're using legacy systems. Is that a pretty approximate assumption, Jeffrey?
That's correct. Yes, it happens a lot.
Yeah, happens a lot. So there's two ways that we control a bot. We control the bot through how we set up our workflows, and we'll go into 3 examples of that. And then how within those workflows we use things which I'm sure some of you are familiar with: if statements, else if statements, loops, and things like that. And then we'll talk about, kind of relate this to something that you're more familiar with. So I'm not going to read this verbatim. You'll have access to this slide once Diana posts it out there for you, but we'll just jump into the workflows. So there's 3 types of workflows. More the developers that you're going to find out in the field, whether even on the business sector, or if you're in my world in the federal government sector, are going to use what we call a state machine. And that's primarily going to be the RE framework, which is a template that's available in Studio. We'll try and get into that hopefully before the end of this, before you all go off for Christmas. It's more of an advanced topic, but I think it's a good topic to talk about in the lower level course. But sequence is a clear succession. The first thing you have in a sequence has to execute before it can go to the next thing in the sequence, so on and so forth. If the first thing doesn't execute correctly, the second item is not going to execute correctly. Then we have a flow chart, which gives you more flexibility to put decision points into your robotic process automation. It gives you the ability to put in different workflow tracks. Okay, so for example, let's relate it to something that you're familiar with, or may be familiar with, or hopefully are familiar with. Let's say you're going to prom, right? There's certain inputs you have to have in order to go to prom. Number one, you have to decide if you want to go to prom. You have to decide if you're going to go with a date, or if you're going to ask somebody to prom, or if you're going to go with a group of friends to prom. Second decisions you have to make are, number one, how are you going to get to prom? Are you going to rent a party bus, a limousine, borrow your mom's car, your sister's car, your brother's car? And then what are you going to wear? The other things, the outputs of that are going to be, what time are your parents requiring you to be home? What's your date going to wear compared to what you're wearing? What are the flowers going to look like? Are they going to match your outfit? Things like that. So there's a lot of decision making that goes into going to prom. And so we're going to use that example as we start to talk about these things. So going to prom is probably not a good automation for a sequence, because if you haven't made a decision on if you're going to ask somebody to prom, or somebody's asking you, or you're going to go with friends, you're not going to get past that first step. So then we go into a flow chart. Flow charts can give us the ability to make decisions. And I don't know, Jeffrey, when I'm done with this, do you have a demo for this part up? Or
I actually do. I wanted to do a little show and tell after you explain all 3.
okay, great.
Just to kind of see, and then I'll wait until you explain the control flows, like the if statements and stuff like that, so I can do the full demo.
Great, we'll do that. Then we have the state machine, which is what we're more familiar with as developers, is what we build within. Now, we can build sequences and flow charts within a state machine, but your state machine has an entry point. It has a transition to a second state of that state machine. And within those transitions, you can set up conditions. So your bot will stay in the state it's in unless you give it a transition point out of that state. And that transition point is very similar to a decision point, has very much centered around exceptions in your process, which we'll get into later. But a state machine is a more static way and a more efficient way to run your automations. And when we start getting into RE framework, we'll get into state machines. Right now, we're going to concentrate for our example on these first 2. Unless Jeffrey wants to take you into state machine, I'll leave that up to him. Then we're going to talk about the control flow, the decision points, these control flow statements. So we already know that the workflow layouts is going to be part of how we control our bot. Then we have these control flow statements, an if statement, else if, a switch, which I use quite often. A while, a do while, and we'll explain the differences between a while and a do while and a for each loop, which I think is going to be probably the most dominant control flow activity besides the if statement that any developer is going to use, right? Because we have to incorporate into our automations decision points for that bot, rule-based decision points. Now we can push bots to do much more than rule-based now that we're starting to incorporate AI, generative AI, and other specialized AI into our ability to build workflows. And in the future, you're going to start hearing a lot about agentic AI, which is AI that can actually make human-based decisions based upon the task it's doing. I think I'll pause there, Jeffrey, because I think next we're going to be going to the if, unless you want me to go through the if statement, or you want me to just stop there for your demo.
No, I think show and tell might help them see sequence processes and stuff like that, which I think is what I
Well,
want
I'll pause there, Jeffrey, and let you go into your demo.
I believe you
I'm
need to
going
share.
to stop sharing my screen, yeah.
Perfect. So let's see here. I'm going to share an entire screen. Please let me know if you can see UiPath Studio.
I can see it, Jeffrey.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. So I'm going to take you guys to the templates here, which is something that we showed you guys where to go to, but we didn't really dive into it. So I'm going to pick here 3 different ones to show you templates. So these are templates that are created to get you started into doing something. The first one I'm going to show you is the attended automation framework. I'm sorry, it is not. It is not that one. It is the found a much better one down here, right here. UiPath Assistant for Excel process. So this is a sequence type, very simple. I'm gonna call it here demo. Again, more of a show and tell. We're not going to do anything with the templates. I just want to show you guys an example of a sequence. Sequence will be your bread and butter of all your automations. Everything is going to, even the flowcharts and the state machines will have embedded sequences in one way or in one form or another. But as you guys can see here, and I'm going to kind of make this bigger so you can kind of see the process a little bit better. It's a sequence. It's even called in the main box main sequence. There's an invoke workflow here that does more stuff. Again, we're not going to go into that, but it's very linear, right? You do step 1, you parse the Excel selection, you get into that Excel file, and here is all it's doing is reading the Excel file data, putting it into a data table, which we talked about this in the variables, and then just outputting the information as here's the workbook path that you provided to me, and you would then build additional stuff. But again, you don't get to, and I'm going to now minimize so we can see the whole flow for the whole sequence. Once you get to the end, you don't get to go back to the beginning. You don't get to move around in this sequence. It just gets to the end. It ends. It's done. Very simple stuff. You don't see a lot of complex logic here. In fact, you don't see any logic because again, this is a template too. But you would just build it out as you go along. So this is the simplest one of all. The next one I wanted to show you is make sure I get the sequence right. The orchestration one. Let's go back to the templates, and I'm going to show you the orchestration. The orchestration, on the other hand, is more of a flowchart. It's actually a flowchart. Sorry, not more of. Again, it's a template, so it's very basic. You'll see here in a second when I bring it up. Looks a little different, right? Looks more like a chart, right? And you see some boxes here. If you start picking up on some of the icons that we use, you'll notice this is the icon of a sequence. So essentially, this flow chart has a sequence embedded into it, which here just invokes another code. But again, you could build this, again, being a template, you would build what you want to do. But this is where it basically is. It kind of comes down here. You see there's a question mark. There's a flow decision. We're going to go into if statements in a second. But you get to see that you get to make a decision. You either it's true or it's false, and it's going to continue. In this, obviously, in flow charts, and one of the major problems, major utilizations of flow charts is that you get to do multiple if statements, and you'll see that when we do the demo later on, how flowcharts can really get interesting and really help us visually understand the logic of the process, because we also have to understand you build a process today, 6 months, a year down the road, you or somebody else might have to go back in there, add something, fix something, remove something, and you need to understand how that flow is and how the process is working. And visually here, you can really tell it out, especially with the annotations that we have. Again, we mentioned this is a sequence. This also here, as you can see, is a sequence, another sequence in here. And these are just invoke, which ends up being other processes that live within your process, which I will bet in some cases are all sequenced. This one is empty. I'm going to go here to init config. Here's another sequence, right? One of the workflows that's being called in there. Last but not least, I'm just going to do a little show of the robotic enterprise framework, something that we'll learn a little bit later on, but just to demonstrate what does a state machine look like and how does it differ from the flowchart. Wait, this one might take a couple of seconds. So here you see there's a lot of boxes. Chris alluded earlier to a start point. Here's our start point, is the initialization. And here's our endpoint. The icons kind of look a little bit different. I'm going to maximize this to make it easier to view. You kind of see that the icons look a little bit different. This one starts and this one ends. Then here there's a few boxes. There's 2 more boxes that are transitions. And again, you can have as many intermediary boxes as you possibly can, depending on what you're trying to do. In this case, it is the framework. So the framework initializes your process, and then it goes and gets data for you. It gets one item, gets one thing that you need to process. And then once it gets that item, it moves here. As you can see, there are arrows going in multiple directions in multiple ways, and this is where you define the state. I like to think state kind of like almost the chemical element kind of thing. Like you have solids, you have liquids, you have gases, and they change states based on how much heat you apply. And here is the logic that you apply to the process. So when you initialize, just to kind of give an overview here, the state is your initialization process. You're going to do everything related to initialization. Once you're done with initialization, you need to change the state. There's going to be logic, and this is where these transitional states that have kind of names to it say the initialization was successful. Okay, let's continue. Let's go on. Let's get some transitional data. Now I'm in the get transaction data state. Once that's completed, do I have data? Yes, I do. I have a new item. Let's go ahead and go process it. Nope, I don't have data. Okay, we're done. Let's go to the answer, that kind of stuff, right? Here, you can see that there's actually multiple. I'm going to open these up here a little bit just so we can kind of see and visualize the transitions. This, again, and we haven't talked too much about how to define these transitions, but this is, again, just to kind of show you so you can kind of visualize it. But this is a situation where here you can have multiple scenarios, things that can happen. You could have a system error, as it says here, system exception, where maybe your application crashed. Maybe something in your application environment, your Windows environment, makes it impossible for us to do it. So it just stops everything, goes back and reinitializes, perhaps closes all the applications, starts from fresh. If it's not, maybe it's just your process that you're trying to do, your business, there's a business exception on your process. Okay, that item is wrong, it's invalid, but that doesn't stop us from continuing to get another item and continue. Those kind of things is the logic you're going to define based on your situation that you have to define. This being the most common, I wanted to show you guys this one just to kind of see, because later on we'll come back to this and go into much deeper detail about it. Any questions before I move it over to Chris? Hearing none.
Nope. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show them how to bring in a workflow and things like that and show the properties of those. Okay, Jeffrey? So let me share my screen. Hopefully I'm sharing the correct screen. Can you see my screen yet, Jeffrey?
Yes.
Okay. So here we have what you would see if you opened up a blank project in UiPath. If you had just gone over here and started a blank process. Here's where the robotic enterprise framework would be. that Jeffrey was alluding to, that state machine we talked about. And here's a blank process. This blank process is going to start as a sequence. You also have that orchestration process that Jeffrey was talking about. We use orchestration processes in UiPath when we have to incorporate a lot of times persistency. Persistency being if we need to bring in a human in the loop. There are some automations where you have to have a human validate the data that the automation is working with. For example, when we're reading invoices with something we call document understanding, we have to have a human in that loop to then validate that the automation extracted the right information from that invoice. So orchestration process gives us the ability at some point to pause for human validation, right? That's the orchestration process. A transactional process is a different type of state machine, but let's talk about this just plain process. We're going to start there and bring in some of these elements. We're going to start with the if statement. So let me hide that guy and find my Studio PN. Here we go. So your activities, your control activities are part of these activity packages that are defaulted when you open up your Studio. So the activities we're going to look for, let's start with the if statement. And there's two ways that we can do an if statement. We can do this, which is the if statement that goes into a linear process. And let me open up a flow chart here as well. And let's just call it flow chart. Or we can go in our start node. I'm a little anal, so I start over here. And I can pull in an if statement this way. If I can pull in a sequence, let's just say I want to pull in this guy. Nope, I don't want to do that. Hold on, let's just do a sequence up here. Bear with me. My mouse is not working. I want to pull in a sequence right here, or let's just pull in, actually, let's pull in a flow chart. A flow chart, and I can pull in a flow decision. I double click this guy. I can pull in a flow decision right here. I can connect my flow chart to it. And this is a different way of, this is a different if statement. This if statement, if you'll notice, they're all based on a Boolean condition. If this equals that, if this information is there, if this decision is made, if I have a date for the prom, if I've asked anybody for the prom, if I am even going to the prom, then you can, on this side, you have this true side, you have this false side. You can then pull in a sequence to connect what you're going to do if it's true and what you're going to do if it's false. Okay, that's in the flow chart, kind. In this type, your condition again is still Boolean. If this information is there, it's a yes or no question that you're asking the bot. If something, if it's yes, do this. If it's no, then you're going to have the then. If it's yes, you have something that you can throw in here. Let's just throw in a log message. And let's just do this. And then you can add things that come down here. You can say, now this is sequential, so this has to happen before before anything else has to happen. But in this one, you have a little bit more flexibility because you have a branch in your workflow, right? In a sequence, it's more linear, like Jeffrey said. If I have a date to the prom, let's just say we'll just create a variable down here called date. We'll make it, that's not a good variable, I guess, but I go Pascal case. You don't, other people do camel case. I'm going to say Boolean, and I can just say date to prom, true, right? If I have a date to prom, I'm going to do this. If I don't, I'm going to do this, right? That's sequential. Whereas on this one, we have date to prom in our flow chart here, date to prom equals true. Then I'm going to go do this set of activities compared to this set of activities. And as Jeffrey's demos will show later, you can have multiple decision points in here. You can have switch in here. As a developer, I prefer to work in flowcharts or state machines, and unless I'm doing a sequence within the flowchart or state machine. I never do. We tend to try and avoid doing a process that is in a sequence, a linear sequence from start to end, because there's too many opportunities or failure points in that. All right. So let's look at this if statement over here in our properties panel. It's not giving me the if statement, the properties panel. Bear with me.
I believe on the new pack, it's all on the screen itself, the activity itself.
So it's not going to show it then?
Yeah, it doesn't show anymore.
Okay. When you get into do whiles and other loops, you'll have some properties over here that you can manipulate. On the if statement, it seems pretty static, that you're going to have this Boolean yes or no. All right. So then let's go back to sharing the presentation. Let's find the presentation. Bear with me because it disappeared on me. All right. Let me share it again. Bear with me, guys. Here we go. You should be able to see the PowerPoint again.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, so let's go into the if statement. Very basic, very much used. It specifies one condition. When we get into else if, we'll talk about doing multiple conditions, but this is going to specify one condition, one pathway to the yes, to the then, or to the else. So your condition to evaluate is going to be Boolean, true or false, something that ends up with a true or false statement for the bot, because the bot's not going to consider anything else. In fact, you'll get an error in your condition statement if it does not amount to a Boolean statement. Doesn't necessarily have to be like I did, where you say date to prom is a Boolean. It could be a string equals, or a string contains this information, but it has to be something that's yes or no. As we said, the then is going to be the set of actions that are going to happen if it's true, and the else is a set of actions that's going to happen if it's false. Okay, so it's going to be either in a flow chart, flow decision in a flow chart, or an if statement in sequences. Then we can get into else statement. Do you want me to keep going, or do you have a demo for else statement, Jeffrey?
No, I'll put it all in.
Okay.
In the final demo.
The else statement's a little bit different, and I'm gonna. Can you see the new screen? Can you see my studio, Jeffrey, or still the PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint.
All right, let me switch to studio. We're going to talk about the else statement. How's that? All right. Can you see my screen now?
I can see studio now.
Okay, good. Let's put in an else if statement, which is different. So we have an else if, and it's got to restore its dependencies. Bear with me one moment because I'm using an else if. Okay. In the else if, you can see again, you have your condition. Again, it has to be something that's going to result in a yes or no. For example, does this string contain this? Does the sum of these digits equal this? Is the digit, is the iteration something greater than 0, whatever it might be? You have your then, but now you have the ability to include more than one else, right? So in this instance, if you have a date to the prom, right? Are you going with your friends? Are you going alone? That kind of deal. Do I have transportation, or does my mom and dad have to drop me off wherever prom's at? Am I going with my friends? What color dress? We'll get into the color dress and the outfits a little bit when we talk about switch statements. If you don't have a car or a ride, who are you going to go with? I don't have a car or a ride. Else, I'm going to go with so-and-so. Else, I'm going to rent a limousine. Else, I'm going to take a cab. Whatever it might be, get an executive Uber, whatever it might be. You have multiple else's in your workflow, right? That's the difference between an if and an else if. That's the primary difference. The then block contains the activities to be performed if it's true, and then you can add more else branches if it's false, more options. Any questions on if statements or else ifs? Going once, going twice. All right. Do while loops. So we have loops, and we have to be very careful in loops. The biggest issue with loops that many people encounter when they're developing is you get trapped in an infinite loop, and your bot goes and goes and goes, and you don't have a break out of that loop. I think that's happened to all of us at some point in our lives, right, Jeffrey?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that thing will run forever if you don't catch it. That bot just loops through and loops through and loops through. So make sure that you have a break out of that loop. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So do while loops. And we'll show you these a little bit in the properties of these in a moment. Do while loops execute while a condition is met. Again, these conditions are primarily going to be Boolean based. They can be data counts, count of data table, row count is greater than 0, and that kind of deal. The condition is looked at by the bot after each execution, right? And it continues that loop until that condition is false. And then it breaks out of that loop on its own. The while loop is a little bit different than the do while loop, because the while loop looks at the execution before, but it also exits if the execution is false. But one of the loops looks at the execution at the condition at the beginning, and one of them looks at the condition at the end. And you'll find it kind of confusing, but as you get into the do while or the while loops, it'll be much more intuitive to you. Then we have for each. There's two types of for each loops, and we'll talk about those in a minute when we show them. One is going to be a for each data row, which is the bot's looking at a data table or something along that line. One is going to be a for each activity as if you're going through an Excel file or a native PDF file or something like that. In these instances, in some of these for each instances, you'll need to insert what's called a break. To break out of that loop, once you want the bot to do that, you have to tell the bot when to break. And you'll find very often, if you don't structure all three these correctly, you'll get into an infinite loop. And you can do this also in a flow chart. You'll get into an infinite loop in these flow charts. You also have max iterations. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Let me unshare this. Do you have a demonstration on the loops, Jeffrey, or do you want me to show the properties of those?
No, you can go ahead. I'll power include it on the final demo.
Okay. I'm going to go back into my studio here, guys. Sorry, I'm going between screens. I have my wall monitor who decides things get a little distorted. All right, so let's go. We're going to kind of delete these guys, and I'm going to put in some loops, and we're going to look at the properties of these loops. Let's start with a for each. Now I can add it this way as well. Let's go into a for each row in a data table loop. Excuse me. You're going to identify the data table that the bot's going to be looking at. And this is something that you may have established in your code when you built a data table, which we'll get into a little bit later when we start talking about working with data and data manipulation. But you can build your own data table and then have the bot look in this data table. You would end up naming that data table using a variable or an argument coming in, and that data table will then be expressed here. And then you're going to tell the bot what to do with each of those items. You can have the bot write the item to a different file. You can have the bot sum the values of the items. Whatever you want the bot to do with each of those row items, you can do here. And if you want the bot to break out of this, you would just insert a break, right? You'd insert the break based upon a condition that you've coded into this body. The bot would break out of this. Whether that loop is done, whether that data table's done, you could break out of your loop. Let's go in and let's look at a do while. do while loop. You can see over here, you have something called max iterations. You can have, now you'll see here, the bot's going to evaluate your condition after it processes whatever it's going to go in and process. So if you're assured that there's data in your data table, or you're assured that this condition is still valid, you can use a do while and have the bot immediately drop into whatever activities that you want it to do on a do while. And then it's going to evaluate your condition, which again is going to probably be Boolean afterwards. And you can do max iterations. How often do you want the bot to loop through this? Because you can control the bot on doing this. You can say, I want you to loop through this process 4 times, 3 times, 2 times. And then the bot will drop out after that max iteration is done, right? So let's go into a while loop. A while loop, you can see the bot's evaluating the condition at the beginning. It's a little bit safer, especially if you're unsure if whatever you want the bot to do in here, that the correct inputs are there. Here it's a little bit safer because you can have the bot check if the correct inputs are there when you do your condition. And then you can have the bot do whatever process you want done. Again, over here you have max iterations. How often do you want the bot to do that? If you leave this blank, the bot's going to do this as long as these conditions are met, right? As long as these are true, the bot's going to go through this loop, right? If you want to limit the bot, you're going to put max iterations here. Now let's talk about the other plain. We did data row. Let's do just a plain for each. Oh. Plain for each. As you can see, it's a workflow control type. Your in is going to be, you can be for each item in an Excel file, for each data row, for each data row that you've extracted from a PDF, each digit, whatever that in item is for each of those in items. Now you'll see that you have different argument types: object, Boolean, string, data table, array. You can set this up. Let's say we want to deal with string values in this for each table. We can change it to a string value. If you're working with strings and this is set as integer, it's not going to work, right? If you're working with a string item, you change this to string. You have to tell the bot what kind of item you're working with. So then you'll have your in item, and then you'll have your body where the bot's doing what it needs to do, right? And again, here you have max iterations right here that you can limit the bot in what it's doing by doing a count of rows or something along that lines. How often you want the bot to come out of there. And let me go back to the screen, the PowerPoint, and we will talk about, I believe, let me share.
The spider.
What's that, Jeffrey?
The spider, as my developers like to call the switch.
The switch? I love the switch. I love the switch because it's so much more flexible, right?
Yeah.
It really is.
Very interesting.
The switch is a little bit more flexible. I enjoy it. It can be confusing. And let's talk about the switch in line with, let's say you've got a prom date, or you're going with all your bros or your girlfriends, and you're all going to decide what to wear, right? Let's talk about switch. So if you're going with a date, the girl may have 4 different choices of dresses, and of course you have to match those. And let's say your friends want you to wear some white Nike Air Force Ones. The girl's wearing a green dress. You said, no, I don't want you to wear white ones. You say, well, I'll wear white Air Force Ones with the green lick on it, right? Or let's say she wants a certain kind of flower. It has to match yours. So you have a lot of decisions. Let's focus on clothes. So we can go into a switch, gives you one choice out of multiple possible choices. You can do this in a workflow, or you can do this in a sequence. And then you categorize, you kind of tell the bot, okay, if this choice is this, we're going to do this. If this choice is this, we're going to do this, right? So let me go back and work before we talk about best practices, and I'm going to show you a switch. Let me find my studio again, or the right one, because I have multiple studios open. This one, I believe. Yep, this one. So let's get rid of these guys and let's pull in a switch, and I'll show you the flow chart switch as well. So let's pull in a switch activity. Okay, this is your switch activity, right? Pretty simple, starts out pretty simple. Again, you have arguments, type. So let's just say string. And this is very important that you set your argument type, especially in a switch. Let's say dress color type of deal. And then you have different cases. Let's say dress color is green. Dress color is blue. Dress color is red. You get the idea. So in each of these cases, if the dress color is green, you can tell your date, your date, what kind of tux or handkerchief or tie or bow tie or shoes or whatever he needs to wear to match your dress color. Same thing with blue, same thing with red. The bot's going to evaluate this dress color that you put in here and go through these choices that you've come up with based upon that. And guys, it'd be the same way. You could do, what do I have to do if her dress color is this color, blue, green, red? That's your dress color. That's your switch. You can do that in a flow chart. It's a little bit, it looks like Jeffrey said, a spider in a flow chart, and it really does. So let's pull in a switch. If I can spell correctly, into a flow chart, you have a flow switch, right? And you can see multiple output points, right? You can do a output point over here. You can have a sequence up here that's coming to this first output point. And it's the same process, different types of conditions for these. So here's your default condition. We can say this one is, that's our default, isn't it? Oh, it's not set up for string. I haven't set it up for integer. Sorry. Let's get started over and get it back to where it needs to be. That was my bad. All right. And let's throw some sequences in there. So you have your default, which is always going to have a default. I usually use just a log message for my default. Okay. And I can do over here, I can do another, and I could say this condition here is going to be case 1. Why is it not? Oh, there it is. Green. Right? If it's green, if it's blue, there it goes. Right? So you get the idea. You can do it in a flow chart, which which I recommend, especially I recommend personally because I don't like using sequences, linear sequences for any process except if it's in a state machine. I do it in a flow chart, and it can end up, as you can see, all the different exit points. It can end up looking much like a spider. And that's where Jeffrey gets this, because most developers are going to put a switch into a flow chart, right?
Correct.
It just gives us more flexibility, and it's probably a best practice. So speaking of, hopefully anybody have any questions about if statements, work loops, or the switch before I let Jeffrey take over and show you a demo. Anyone?
Do the sequences take the output of the switches as arguments? It's like, you see where you have like the green, like if the green was the case for the flow switch, does the sequence take that as an argument?
The sequence going to take this as, this is a decision point. You're telling the bot, okay, I'm wearing green, a green dress, and then you do what's in here.
Oh, so that's not like being taken as like data. It's just like, oh, you chose green, so now you're gonna go.
Right. It's not going to be
Oh,
an argument. It's going to be a path.
okay.
If you remember in the state machine, Jeffrey kind of really quickly demonstrated, it's going to be one of those transition points. It's going to be a path, right? Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Yeah.
just
So if
like
if the
ago.
bot's taking this green path, anything that's in this sequence is the bot's going to assume has to do with green.
Okay.
And just to further take that, theoretically, if you're passing a variable to the switch, your variable will hold the data. So in
Right.
other words, if I'm saying the flow switch is based on variable color of my dress and the value is green, it's going to go to that box. One, you already know that it is green, but you can still use the variable that holds the value green as your input for other things that you want to do through your process. So technically you do have it as long as you're using variables to do that. If you have static, obviously I actually wouldn't see an example where you would have static values, but you could have an input from another, not like an argument from another activity. But
Okay, that makes sense.
Adila, I did miss your question earlier. You said, "Is this the studio equivalent of else?" At what point was this? Was this when we started talking about the switch?
Yes, when you
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So to answer that question, I think very simply in the flowcharts, you don't really have an else if statement because your if statement is chained in. We're going to see that on the demo in a few minutes. But it's basically your if else if is because once you create your first condition, your second condition will be on your false side always through your iterations. And that's how you create your else if in the flowchart.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. I'm slightly still lost, but I'll just watch the demo.
Yeah, I'll demo it. Don't worry. Any other questions? Not hearing any. Chris, you mind if I share? Or do you have anything else to go over? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
I was talking on mute. Sorry. I have nothing else. Yeah. Welcome to a Tuesday morning, right?
Mhm.
And one cup of coffee so far. I have nothing else to share. And we're going to go into best practices next. So you can take as much time as you need, Jeffrey, because I think we're a little bit ahead of schedule here.
Yep. No, you've been doing a really good pace here. Takes the stress out of the demo. All right, so here we are back in studio. I am now going to create a process. We're going to call this our prom demo. I like that idea, Chris. That was genius. It's a very tough decision to make every year, every class. So here we are in the project. I'm going to open main as our main application. Now, main always starts as a sequence. It assumes that, oh, it's the most simple one. We're always going to throw a sequence in there. You don't have to follow the sequence. I'm actually going to delete the sequence. I'm going to go look for a flowchart to put here. Granted, I could have put a flowchart inside of that sequence, but it just looks ugly to me, and I just don't like it. So let's bring our flowchart here. I actually tend to still drag and drop. It's a bad habit of mine, but most just use the plus sign these days. But anyway, all right, let's give us some more space here because. So unlike Chris, I start mine in the middle. That's my OCD telling me to do. So here's what we're gonna do. I think the first thing that we have to decide when we create any process and any flow is what are we trying to determine? What are we trying to come up with here at the end? So I think I'll use the prom and some of the things that I'm going to put here. Obviously, we could go crazy with this and really come up with what to wear and what to do and all that stuff. So I'm just going to come up with um, some variables here to define some of the things that I want to create. So first of all is the prom date, as we had early. Do we have a prom date or not? I'm actually going to make this a date time because it's going to be a value that I'm going to create somewhere. actually. In the system, I usually know that, but we now have a lot of variables already available to us that uses date times and manipulates date times. So, but the system.datetime is always the native one. The other one is I want my prom companion I'm going to put here. Of course, I need to learn how to spell still.
Hey, I do the same thing.
What else do I need? I'm going to say, do I want to go going to prom? This is the one of the questions we're going to ask ourselves. Am I going to prom? True or false? What else do we want to do? Let's find out if I'm going with a date or friends, right? That's another question that we need to ask ourselves. And for now, I think this is going to be a good start. So first of all, we're going to determine if we already have a prom date. Obviously, this is just a simplistic way. There would probably be something here that feeds this date into the system. Maybe you're going into the school website to see if there's already a date set for the prom or not. But for simplicity reasons, we're just going to say, do I have a prom date? So here from my decision is just that. Do we have a prom date? Question mark. I actually like to do this, and I just forgot now. Do I have a prom date? Now, how do I define? Let's go here to the properties, because flowcharts usually don't have. I'm actually going to stick the properties here because we're going to need it. How do I define? So date time is actually sort of what I call a complex, variable type, because it has a lot of. It's a class on its own, and it really has two ways to check. Date time default, which is basically what the date is set, is like 111. So first day of the first month of the first year. So now there's an easier way to define if prom date time variable is default. You literally just ask that question. Is my prom date default? Actually, does it not work with prom dates? Or am I using the wrong condition? No. So we're going to do the old-fashioned way, which is 111. So if the default day is 111, I thought, Chris, do you know, does default check on VB different than C#? Was it just a syntax way?
It may be in this newer version.
Okay. Well, either way. This is actually the way I've done it for many, many years until I found the default version. But then again, kind of like how Mason said last meeting, I tend to default to C# more. But because VB is the most popular one, I'm sticking to VB for the demo. But this is usually this. I've actually done this. I've also done something similar where I'll take my date variable and I say, is it less than today 1,000 years? Theoretically, nothing should be less than today minus 1,000 years. But as I said, typically the default is 0. So what do I want to do? So if I'm determining here that the prom date is not set yet, and I'm going to use here an activity you guys might have not used or seen being used in these demos before, which is delay. I typically, we don't use a lot this, but we do have some cases where delay is important. I could, for example, here place that I want this to be delayed. Let me just see. This is hours, 24 hours. Sorry, is this? Yeah, there we go. 24 hours, 0 minutes. So I want to delay it 24 hours and then come back to check if I already have a prom date. This will be an example of something that you can do with a flowchart that you typically can't do. As a matter of fact, I can link this. There we go. All right. That you typically can't do with a sequence, because I'm basically going back to the beginning in this case, or going back to some previous step because something happened that made me question my decision. For example, in this case, it's just the fact that I don't have a prom date and I need to wait another day to see if tomorrow a date has already been set, and this simplistic and simple, and then we can carry on with our process. So if you're running this on a computer, this would just sit there doing absolutely nothing for 24 hours. So not ideal. There's better ways of orchestrating your processes than this, but this is a demo. So just for the demonstration purposes, we're going to do that. So now, what happens when we determine that we have a prom date? So another big question that I have to ask, and theoretically, I could ask this before. And again, this is where understanding what you're defining and what the steps are in a process is really the key element to this, because you can't really start developing until you know what you are. But this is why we use this example, because I think it's very straightforward. But theoretically, I can determine if I want to go with a date, or if I want to go with my friends, or if I want to go at all, way before I even have a prom date, right? But let's take that's not the case. I'm still undecided, and the trigger for me is there a prom date already selected or not? So now I'm going to determine, do I want to go? Now, I'm not linking this yet for a reason. I'm actually going to ask myself that question. I'm going to use here another activity that you might have not seen, because from an unattended orchestrator, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. This is called the input dialog. It's a dialog box that prompts you with more information than just OK button, right? Like the message box or anything like that. You can actually define what you want. I'm going to call this prom, and my labels here are going to be what I want to ask myself. Am I going? Question mark. Now I want this to be a multiple choice. It's only going to be 2, yes or no, right? And you define it by simply creating a string, separating with a semicolon. And I'm just going to simply say yes or no. I'm going to create here a simple response going to prom. Now, the interesting part here is that this is going to return a string. So my if statement here is going to be based on the fact that I need to create a Boolean out of that string. So simply put, we're going to open this here in a bigger box so we can see it better. I'm going to put response. Sorry. Response going to prom dot contains yes. If it contains yes, this will return true, and that means I'm going to the prom. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a variable here that says, oh, I hate assigns inside of flowcharts. I just remember that. We're probably going to make this into a sequence anyway. So I did had here going to prom as a variable, so I'm going to say that this is true. And there's a lot of different ways we could do this. We could make this decision into the actual going to prom Boolean before we check for the decision. But again, I don't want to complicate this too much. And obviously, the default is false, so I don't need to set anything else to false. Now, remember earlier, I believe Adiola asked about, is this our version of an else if? In this case, the output is just yes or no. But what if I had a maybe in there? Maybe I wanted to do something else. If it's maybe, I want to still continue with the rest of my questions. If it's no, then it's definitely not. Well, I would just create here another dialog that would say, I'm going to put here, is it maybe? We haven't defined that value, but let's assume that we did. And I'll just have to change this here to maybe. And now I can say, well, if it's maybe, I kind of still want to go there. I still want to go to the going to prom, yes, and I'll figure out the rest later. Maybe I create even a flow that doesn't define going to prompt to true, and I just come back later to it. And then this is finally going to be my final box, which for the purpose of this demo is just going to be a log message. By the way, you can also create infinite loops like this and flowcharts.
You don't necessarily always want to, though.
No, like in that case. And just have a great day. Watch some movies, get some popcorn, stay home. So here's a simple example. Let's execute what we have here so far. And actually, I'm going to put here another log message after this one that's basically going to say, going to prompt. So let's execute a little process here. And obviously, you don't get to see too much other than the point that it gets to here and says, am I going to prompt? So it actually went through the process, which actually it shouldn't have. So I definitely think I have something that I am missing with the date check. I'm going to use my old form of doing it. But let's just demo this out. I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to prompt. And this is my assistant executing. Let's go here to the outputs. Going to prompt, execute it. So I'm going to go back to my flowchart. I'm going to correct my mistake here. I'm just going to say if less than today. Why is it still saying no? Add yes. Well, no, it's not. It's absolutely right. There we go. No, it's not there. Add years. Am I spelling this? This is why I like IntelliSense, and I just kind of skipped it by misspelling it. It's easier a lot of times to just delete the item and then recreate after the dot. That condition is actually this shouldn't be true in that sense. But to make this easy, I'm going to just say no, and I'm going to put here it should place me on the delay. Chris, I am baffled now.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not doing that, Jeffrey, because it
Yeah.
should theoretically what you've got there works.
Any of those things work in my production environment. It works on my machine, I promise, guys.
Well, I think the point is that it would
Right.
stay on that delay until you made that
Right.
until that date came in, right?
Yes, exactly. I'm still going to try the and this is a version of 2023, so we don't have Copilot here to like figure out what we're doing wrong.
No.
But that's okay. So I'm just going to put this one here to true for now to demonstrate. If you guys try this out on your computers, let me know if you're either one of the methods that I use to test the date works or also gives you that error. It is very strange that it does. Okay, so with that said, this part is good. Now, what do we need to determine next? Let's see how we're doing in time, 10:05. So now we would continue our questioning where we would say, so now I'm determined that I'm going. If I'm not, it's just going to be an exit. And I'm going to bring another flow decision. And now I need to ask myself, am I going with am I going with a date or am I hanging out with my friends? So this does have a limit. Kind of makes us only use what we can. And I'm actually going to use the other method, which is I'm actually going to say going with date or friends. And here I'm going to use a similar method, but I'm going to do the reverse of what I just did. I'm actually copying this over to here. I'm going to hide the variable. I'm just going to minimize it a little bit. And here I'm going to modify this with taking a date or going with friends. Now we're going to modify our answers to date or friends. We're going to change our variable here. Response to okay. And now I'm going to basically just create what I suggested earlier, where I actually define my variable going or going with dates with just saying response to companion that contains dates, then that would be true. Otherwise, it'll be false. So here I can now, and obviously this is set to a specific size. So I'm making it bigger. And because I need more space, I'm actually going to place it here. You can place it anywhere you want. You can take the arrows from any corner of the four corners of the activity. Of course, with the switch, you have plenty of them, but in this case, we have this. So here's my condition. I misspelled that. There we go. Now, if I went with if I'm going to go with a date, I might want to pick who somebody to go with me, right? So let me put here prom date choices, and we're going to do a little demo of a for each. Could do a do while, but in this case, I'll do it for each. I'm going to create an array, which is a list of sorts, and I'm going to put string. Put OK, and then, and because it's easier to open this box and make it bigger, I'm going to put here new string, open parentheses. Now let's define some names here. Let's pick here some common names, Jane, Mary, and maybe Kathy. Not Lucky, Kathy. Okay. So that's it. That's my list of who I want to ask to go on a date. So let's go ahead and grab here a for each. See, there's a few. And I want the regular for each. And for each, I'm going to give it my list of prom date choices. Now I'm going to assume that this person is going to be living on the computer. This is going to run, and I'm going to ask this person, "Do you want to go on a date with me?" Now, one thing that's important is maybe this is this is the name that defaults as current item. I'm going to define it as my date name. And I'm going to ask another question where I say, it's my prawn app. Would you like to go to the prom with me? This is going to be a multiple choice. And it's either going to be yes or no. We're not giving maybes here. No maybes. I like to naming in a way that makes sense in English. And now because a for each is technically a sequence, I'm going to just use the regular if statement here. And we could, and just like I said earlier, when I deleted the main sequence and said I'm just going to drag a flowchart here, you could technically drag a flowchart here if it's a really complex one and create it here. I always say if you have a flowchart instead of a flowchart, it probably is a separate script on its own. So you could just invoke a workflow and kind of pass values as you need to. But again, it all depends on the complexity, and this is a determination that you would make at a time. So date response. All I want to do is if the date response contains yes, we're done. We're not going to need to ask anybody else. So we are done, and we're going to continue doing something else. So I am going to first and foremost set my variable prom companion to my date name. The other thing I need to do is use that break activity that Chris was showing, because we're done. We're not going to iterate through anymore. And obviously for demonstrations, I'm going to use Mary as the one that's going to actually accept my my invitation. If it doesn't, there's nothing really to be done. I could put a log message or a message box saying, not this one, or something funny like that, but that's about it. Going back to, and again, this is the path of your, as you get into flowcharts and sequence inside of sequences, you get to build a path as you go into these activities. Use this as your guide so you can come back to the main of your flow. So let's just put here, just because I don't like to leave false hanging in there. I like to put a log message for myself, just saying going with friends. My fingers don't work in the order of my brain. Here we go. Once again, we're going to execute our process. And first question, am I going to the prom? Yes, I'm going to the prom. Of course, I'm going to the prom. Am I taking a date or going with friends? I'm going to take a date. We want to pick one. Now, I would be the date now going, do I want to go to the prom with Jeff? And I'm going to say no. No, I really don't. Now, I should have put here the name of the prom in this prompt, which would make it funnier, but or easier to see. I'm going to say yes, though. And we're done. I also didn't put, for demonstrations, I think that makes sense to put. So let's go fix that input box. And I'm going to say, no, this is the other one. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to put here date name. I'm going to append it to my message. Obviously, now it's no longer the beginning of a sentence. So I'm going to say the name of the date. Would you like to go to the prom with Jeff? And the last part I'm going to do is do a message box, actually, just because we haven't used them and I use them solely. Here, date is, and now we're going to put prom companion because that is the one that we ultimately, put in, which I would assume here that would have some additional logic to it. I think once you remove what you have, IntelliSense catches up again. If you mess up somewhere, it'll just go away because it can't figure out what you're trying to say. So let's try this one more time, just so we can kind of see the steps. We're going to prom. Yes, I am. Am I taking a date? Yes, I am. Jane, would you like to go to the prom with Jeff? I'm going to once again say no. Jane really doesn't like to go. Oh, I put the message box in the wrong spot. Now, Mary would like to go to the prom with Jeff. Yes, Mary wants to go to the prom with Jeff. And I put it in the wrong spot. No, I went too quick. So for each, yes, because I broke the, yes, this cannot be here because after the break happens, that never executes. So I'm going to bring it out here and place it all the way in the bottom. This is just to kind of also demonstrate a little bit that when you try to develop something on the fly, some things will not work. Running it over and over and over again will always help you determine where the fallacies are. One thing that we also haven't gone and covered over is breakpoints. Breakpoints help you stop somewhere where you normally wouldn't have stopped. Like say I want to put a breakpoint here, it'll actually stop me so I can see what's going on. You get to inspect things. We'll cover that in another time, so I want to waste. Just gonna one last time run here. Just checking the message, make sure that everything's okay. And running for one last time. Yes, I'm going to the prom. I will pick my date. And Jane still does not want to go with me. So again, the message box was popping up here. It shouldn't have because it was inside of the for each. So I had removed it out. Now Mary's going to say no. When we did this last time, it didn't pop up with the message box because it had a breakpoint and the break never executed the message box. Now it's telling me that Mary is my prom date. So I think obviously I didn't demonstrate everything. One thing that I would like to say about do whiles and do's is the question that I always ask myself when I'm trying to determine if I need to check the condition prior or after is, do I need to run this at least once? And then there's going to be some examples where that answer is going to be yes. And if you have something that you need to execute at least once, then you want the condition at the bottom. If you want to make sure that the condition, if it's true, do you want to run that instance, then you want to use the other one. That's really the only way to like simplify it in mine at least, when to use the do or the do while for my duals. But again, loops are very similar. I always used to be always afraid of infinite loops as well. And at some point, I always used to put like a date check that if it took longer than 10 seconds of execution, you also wanted it to stop. There's a million different ways that you can use loops for and avoid, those infinite loops. But the best way is to debug your code and make sure that you're not missing any logic in the process. Just make sure. Any questions in the meanwhile? Any things that made sense or did not?
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry you didn't. I'm sorry she didn't want to go to the prom with you.
I really wanted Jane to go.
All right. I'm going to share my final slide, and then I'll talk a little about. There's a couple more things, like Jeff said, that we want to cover that we'll have to start with next time we meet. Let me share my screen. We'll talk about best practices about what we've done today. But there are some things that we did not get to talk about. Let's talk about sequences. We learned that sequences are best suited for simple linear operations. If there are some decision points that need to be made in there, we can use the if, but I think any developer's going to tell you the flow chart's going to be more like what Jeff just demonstrated, can be more ideal because it gives more flexibility. So be very careful when you're doing a sequence, because you have to remember that the first block has to execute before the second block does. It's very hard to do a decision point in that. And when we work with sequences, we often get into the need for nested if statements. We'll explain what that is next time, but we want to avoid nested if statements. You know about the if activity splits the sequence vertically. And again, nested if statements should be avoided to keep the workflow simple and linear. Nested if statements, and again, we'll show you that next time, what not to do. Flow decision activities, Jeff just demonstrated a lot of those, and I know I'm talking fast, and I apologize for running out of time. And we'll talk more about switch activities if you need some help on those next time. The default case, like I said, I just usually put a log message in there telling what the default is, like no dress color was chosen, or we ended up choosing a purple dress and it's not listed as one of those case options. And then we'll talk about VB operators. If you're going through the self-directed training, you'll get into VB operators when you're working with control flows. But there's another one I want to talk about. And Jeff, I know that you probably agree with me that is somewhat a flow control, but not specifically designed as one, which is a try-catch. And I want to talk about try-catches next time, because we want to handle exceptions as part of our flow control. So we'll start there next time we meet, answer any questions you have about flow control, go into these one-offs, and then we'll jump into the next subject matter. Does anybody have any questions? I'm about to give you 8 minutes back before Jeff and I go off with the rest of our days.
No, we're good. Thank you.
All right. Now, the recording, there was a question. The recording will be available. I just don't know if Diana's, who's at a UiPath event, if she's going to post it today or not. But we'll make sure it gets posted.
It's no problem. Actually, I got to say that this one was well, probably for the first time we really didn't have much interruptions.
Right? No fire drills today, right?
So yeah, so whenever this was posted, it's fine. But I also had the leaders, like I talked about last time, earlier,
Right.
and they saw some of it as well. So they should be able to get the process going, and we should be able to start attacking contraflow. Contraflow. Oh my God, that's like hurricane stuff there.
Right. That's called PTSD, Dr. Newfield.
Hey, I'm originally from Louisiana, so where we invented contraflow. So my PTSD goes way back to the 90s.
I bet it does, right?
So no, they should be able to start attacking control flow no later than Thursday. Most of them were finishing up the variables yesterday or later on today. And so whenever this video is posted, that'll be perfect timing for them to start watching it. And
be sure, if anybody has any questions, you can filter those to Jeff and I outside of the class, outside of these regular meetings. And we can do
Sounds good.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Talk to you.
Thanks, everybody.